Hi, so we're looking at the Safeguarding and Protecting Vulnerable Individuals unit again today, but learning outcome 2. Now, this learning outcome is understand the management of a service which safeguards and protects vulnerable individuals. And we'll be looking at the following assessment criteria. So 2.1, analyze how service provision supports individuals to take risks and make informed choices. 2.2, provide information to others on signs and symptoms of abuse. 2.3, inform others of measures to be taken to avoid abuse taking place. And the last criteria is 2.4, articulate with others practice that maintains the safety and protection of vulnerable individuals. Now, I'd like to take your attention down to the indicative content. So when you're actually coming down to do your assignments, just make sure you're following learning outcome 2 over here. Just look at the keywords that have been put in. Make sure that you're following the same sort of aspects when you're going to answer your questions. So let's make a start. So just as a bit of an introduction, now we know that safeguarding is a very big issue, whichever sector you're working with. But in healthcare, as health professionals, you're going to be learning a lot more, and you're going to be noticing a lot more, especially if you're in an aspect where you're working with patients or service users on a daily basis. Now, we know that everybody has a right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Things happen, and sometimes you can be there to point something out and to bring it to attention so that help can be given to someone. So, abuse and neglect, unfortunately, it can happen anywhere, in your home, public places, hospitals, daycare centres, colleges, care homes, anywhere. So you might be living alone, or you might be with others. The person that's, causing you harm might be a stranger, but unfortunately, more often than not, you'll notice that you might even know them, you might even feel safe with them, or you might not. To be honest, abusers end up getting into your lives, and they'll come and they'll, build a friendship with you where you think, oh, this is okay. You may or may not realize what's happening. So as care workers within the organization, it's your responsibility to just keep an eye out and see what's going on. And the following point of this lesson is we will be showing you what sort of things you can take a look at, what sort of procedures are there to be followed, and what sort of training is available. So these people that might abuse others, they're probably in a position of power and trust. There might be a healthcare professional, there might be a relative, a neighbour, just somebody that they trust. It might be a teacher at school, so somebody that they're close to. Now, when you get a moment, please click on this link. It's a very nice read. It's about the abuse and neglect of vulnerable adults. It's a safeguarding document, and it's been written by the NHS. So it was a lovely read. So it's nice if you can have a quick look at this. So, safeguarding responsibilities. We've all got safeguarding responsibilities. If you see something, if you hear something, do not be afraid to say something. It's very important. Even if it turns out to be insubstantial, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. At least you were caring enough to notice and to pay attention to it. So let's make a start. 2.1, analyze how service provision supports individuals to take risks and make informed choices. Now, we know that individuals, to feel empowered and to know what's going on, they need to be able to know exactly what is happening. They need to be given informed choices. They need to be given all the data, all the information, so that they know what they're deciding for is informed. They have all the details there. Now, this is done in a number of ways. It can be done by management, supervisors, third parties explaining the pros and cons of a decision, workshops or printed materials like leaflets, posters, training courses, information, internet. But overall, whatever it is that you're getting this information from, you need training. Now, training is extremely important to help you make choices, to help an individual to take risks, and to know exactly when and where they can do something, and just to help them not feel like they're overstepping, that they know exactly what their duties are. So, if we're looking at training resources, we're going to look at some sort of leaflets and articles and coaching and mentoring sessions or so. Now, for types of abuse over here, we know there's many types of abuse. So you've got emotional or verbal abuse, where you're just getting constantly told off or shouted or belittled. Physical abuse. Financial abuse, where you might be stopped from having a bank account or somebody might have money being withheld from them. Sexual abuse. Stalking, where someone is following or harassing someone or monitoring them. And then digital abuse, where the use of technology and bullying and stalking and threatening. Now, in a previous establishment that I worked at, it was full of a lot of teenagers. Now, there was a lot of digital abuse happening over there. It came to such a point where management decided to manage this to make sure that we can eradicate it or even minimize this. Mobile phones were not allowed to be used on the school grounds. They were not allowed to be taken into class. They were not allowed to be on. A child could have it on their body, but they weren't allowed to take it out. The first instance, you take your phone out, that's it, they'll take it off you. And I thought that was a fantastic step because it was stopping a lot of bullying, especially digital bullying, happening. Now, physical abuse. Now, we know physical abuse is an act of violence or something like a force that will cause bodily harm to someone else. Now, it's where someone will get physically discomforted, they might get impaired, they might be caused to have an injury or be in pain. So some people will show signs of physical abuse, some will not. So the way, this is an example of how we would convey this information. So regardless of whether you're talking about child abuse or adult abuse, abuse in general, you'll see that there's leaflets, there's materials out and about, and this is one way to inform someone of risks. Then we've got emotional abuse. Now, emotional abuse is when an abuser will subject an individual to behaviours that might result in some sort of PTSD, like psychological trauma, where they might get verbally bullied, they might be aggressive, they might dominate someone. So just belittling them and saying you're not worthy or you don't know anything, just in a whole lot of ways. And here's an example of how we could let individuals know. So maybe your staff members or your colleagues, volunteers, anyone that comes in, even the patients, know what is emotional abuse. It's a leaflet on it, which you will see out and about. If you do a simple search, there's a load of material on. Then sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is unwanted sexual activity. So it's where the perpetrator will use force, make threats, or take advantage of the victims. The victims might not be able to give consent. Now, sexual activity might even be forced upon where they're saying, we'll give you this phone or we'll give you this gift, or, trying to get vulnerable people to coerce them through gifting. So we know that if sexual abuse was to happen, the reaction that we feel will be shocked and we'll be scared. We'll be like, how on earth could this happen? So here's a way that we can actually give information out. So here's another leaflet just explaining what sexual abuse is, what happens, and what your choices are. So again, another leaflet example. So a neglect and acts of omission. So neglect can be intentional or unintentional. But when you look at neglect and active omission, it's where you're having a failure to provide access to appropriate healthcare. You might not have enough support. You might not be getting educational services. Your necessities of life are being withheld from you. It might be freezing out and you might be turning up in shorts and slippers. So it really can be done intentionally or unintentionally. Then we've got financial abuse, where somebody will exercise control over a person. They might be in a relationship, they might be a parent, they might be somebody in a trusted position where they're not letting the victim have finances. They're trying to control them, maybe giving them a certain amount of money that they can use and that's it. So it's where you're not letting them open bank accounts or be in charge of your own income or benefits that they may receive. Then discriminatory abuse. Discrimination is abuse that focuses on a difference or perceived difference, what people see as different. So this might be things like race, gender, disability, and we know that a lot of this is under the Equality Act of 2010. So some examples of this is where you might get bullied in a office environment where you might be the only female there and you're getting bullied by male employees. Or if someone's giving you silent treatment, or they're saying bad things about you, or they're just not liking a particular way you look, so they're picking on you in that example. And then institutional abuse. So institutional abuse is the maltreatment of a person. So it's normally children or older adults. Now, this is from an institution that has got a system of power. So mistreatment of people can be brought about by poor or inadequate care or support or systematic poor practices by the whole care system. And then it can also occur when the individual's wishes are being ignored or they're being sacrificed for the smooth running of a group. So say this particular person A needs these 1, 2, 3 things, but we don't want to do it because it's going to harass us, it's going to cause us to be out of control when we don't want to go ahead with it. We're not bothered, let's just ignore what they need. So that was 2.1. Now 2.2 is provide information to others on signs and symptoms of abuse. So how can you tell if someone is being abused or neglected? And there's a lot of signs and symptoms there, and it's not very easy, to be honest, to identify signs. But if you're with somebody on a consistent basis, or you know that you're familiar with someone, it's probably easier to notice changes in them and be able to find out what's going on. So there are common signs as well, and some of these are if you see multiple bruisings or finger marks, injuries that can't be easily explained, deterioration of health for no apparent reason and sudden and unusual loss of weight, inappropriate or inadequate clothing, withdrawal or mood changes, a carer who is unwilling to allow access to the person, a person who is unwilling or unhappy about being left alone with a particular carer, and unexplained shortage or disappearance of money. So those are some signs. So, as we know, that it's more likely that the person that is responsible for the abuse will be known to the adult. They're going to be in a position of trust and power, and I know I've said this a few times, but that is normally the case. So it's really important to remember that when abuse or neglect happens, it can actually happen anywhere. It can happen in the home, in a public place, in the hospital, on the bus on the way to work. It can happen literally anywhere. So abuse avoidance. So how are we going to provide information to others to try and get abuse avoidance? So there is something called a culture of openness and dignity, which is what we're going to try and encourage here. So if you get a culture of openness in the NHS, it's actually quite critical to improving the quality and safety of healthcare. There's an overwhelming majority of patients who are coming in and out of organizations, say, for example, hospitals. And it's very good, or it's something that we need to achieve to make sure that they're getting safe and effective care whilst they're there, that they're not at risk of being abused. So it's also important to promote and create a culture of dignity. It's really important that you not only have interpersonal skills, like you would have seen when you're looking at person-centered approaches or person-centered care, where we're talking about dignity and empathy and respecting people's individualities and their rights. But it's also about, honoring all of these things as well, and being mindful about the importance of, how we actually honor their dignity. We've got policies in place now where we know that we need to do a certain amount of things just to be able to follow these. And then you need to have a clear complaints procedure. So if you you're going to provide information to others. You're going to tell them what abuse is, how it happens, and so on. But then you're going to need a clear complaints procedure, aren't you? So you might have an organogram at work, which it just shows that your staff roles and duties that are posted throughout your setting. Now, I've seen many of these in many establishments that I've been. It's just something similar to what you've got over here, where you might have images of people, photos, and then telling you what the actual roles they are, what their title is, what their roles are. Or you might have like this type of system here, where you've got a hierarchy system about who you know exactly who you're going to report a concern to. You know your steps. It's very clear, it's easy, it's visible. So even on a last minute thing, if you're not sure, you can go and look at these posters and signage around your establishment and find out. Then the last part of 2.2 is, even though you're looking at leaflets and coaching and mentoring and passing information on and having clear signposting around, giving information, sometimes it's good to have training, official training. So you might need to go into an adult protection course. Now, these courses will provide staff members with an understanding of the main elements of adult support and protection, and it follows the 2007 Act. And the duties and the definition of what they will cover is, they cover the national policy context, local statutory systems, and they also tell you what your responsibilities are under this Act. So it's nice and eye-opening to have somebody go on that course and then they can pass information on to other staff members. So now moving on to 2.3. Inform others of the measures to be taken to avoid abuse taking place. So how do we reduce the risk of abuse? Now, as we said a few times, every adult, every child, every person has the right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. So in the case of vulnerable adults, it's your collective, everyone's collective responsibility to make sure that they're protected from harm. So this will include people taking action to reduce the risk, and keeping an eye out for them, making sure that they're not getting targeted by perpetrators of abuse. So adults of any age can be targeted by criminals who, might wish to abuse them or exploit them or get them to do a certain amount of things for them. So abuse can be done in many forms. Physical abuse, sexual, psychological, modern slavery, financial or material abuse, neglect and acts of omission, self-neglect, domestic violence and discriminatory abuse and organizational abuse. So how do we prevent this abuse in vulnerable adults? We've got to keep an eye out for family, friends and neighbours, people who are in regular contact with these vulnerable adults. You've got to understand that abuse can happen to anyone. Some people are good at hiding the signs, some are not, but it can really happen to anyone. If a person's isolation is an issue, discuss with them ways that you might be able to try and limit it. So they might have an issue with feeling lonely and they might end up being targeted by certain groups I've noticed or know about them. So try and put steps in place before this can be an issue. Try and speak to the person about what you suspect is happening to them. And speak up and report any suspicions you have of any abuse. And then spread the word about the importance of looking out for adult abuse. Raise awareness and understanding. Now, we all know that abuse with children and young people is something that everybody is aware of and everyone's keeping an eye out. But it's the same sort of situation for adults and vulnerable people. So it's a good idea to spread the awareness and say that, yes, this happens with children, but it also can happen with vulnerable adults. And then stages. So we're going to talk about the measures about what we're going to do to take, if abuse is happening. So if you find out abuse is happening, who are you going to report it to? What are you going to do? Where's this concern going to do? Now I'm going to show you a couple of slides about, so the following slide will show you what the stages are. But again, if you click onto this link here, this hyperlink, 7 stages of safeguarding, it follows some of the stages that I've gone on through and there. And it's a very nice read. It'll give you a lot more information and it's a nice thing that you can refer to when you're doing your essay. So we've got this document here. So you've got stage 1, raise an alert. Stage 2, report an alert or inquire. Stage 3, assessment or applying thresholds. Stage 4 is strategy discussion or meeting. Stage 5 is investigation. Stage 6 is case conference, or you're having the SARB, so safeguard planning meeting. And then stage 7 is to review. So you know that if anything's happened with an adult safeguarding issue, they need care or support, if there's been any physical abuse, psychological abuse, domestic neglect, self-neglect even, how you're going to raise an alert and how it's going to be inquired about. So there's quite big stages of what it goes through. But stage 1 is you raising that alert. That's how it gets done. And then 2.4. So the last assessment criteria for this learning outcome. So articulate with others practice that maintains the safety and protection of vulnerable individuals. So you know there's a lot of ways to share information with your colleagues or your staff members or people that work for you or that are under your care. The most effective and legally binding way to do this is via policies. So you've got those legislations that are there, health and safety, equality and diversity, and there's so many different things out and about that we can adapt those legislations to reflect on our own organizations, what we're doing, if we're working with children, young people, if you're working with adults, if they're vulnerable. Your HR department will tweak these policies and use the things that are there to reflect in that to give you good procedures and policies to follow. So every setting has policies and procedures. Now, the following policies will apply here. So safeguarding, risk assessment, induction policies, CPD, equal opportunities, requirement, and recruitment procedures. Apologies. So we'll go through these. So the safeguarding policy, this policy sets out statutory requirements for the NHS England to discharge its appropriate accountability for safeguarding children, young people and adults at risk of harm and abuse. So this is the policy that the NHS has got about safeguarding. So it's actually quite a nice read to go through. It's set out very nicely and clearly. It's something you might want to refer to. So this policy will set out, it defines how health and other systems work together, so healthcare systems, to safeguard children, young people and adults. Clearly sets out the legal framework for safeguarding within the NHS, and it also helps the staff to meet the statutory requirements in aspects of safeguarding. And it outlines an ethos that recognises the crucial importance of safeguarding vulnerable individuals. And also the fact that it's everybody's responsibility regardless of what your role is. CPD policy. So CPD, continual professional development. So CPD portfolio typically includes a selection of activities. So it's where you're normally in the traditional sense, where you're getting training sessions or working towards your own professional development. So it can be work-based, professional, formal, self-directed, or even other types of learning, like you might have coaching or mentoring and so on. So this CPD can actually include trainings in any area. So it might be on a particular procedure that you want to do if you're working doing medicinal procedures, or it might even be about safeguarding or want to get a bit more information on equality and diversity. You might want to learn a few tricks and things that you want to go on. So CPD can be applied to anything. Then you've got the risk assessment policy, and we've got a link here. We would have a look at that. So under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, an employer must make an assessment of the risks to health and safety of the employees and others. So you might, if you're working in management, you might already be doing this, where you're going around, you're making a note of, are the taps leaking? Is there any wet substances on the floor? Any loose tiles? Have I got any hazardous substances or cleaning substances? Have they been left out? Are there chairs that are blocking paths, or is there a bag that's going to trip someone up? So basic things you're doing anyway. So the purpose of this assessment is to identify action necessary to comply with legal requirements, is to make suitable and sufficient assessments of risks, and to make arrangements for the effective planning of this. Then we've got the Equal Opportunities Policy. Now, this ensures that the practice abides by an equal opportunities policy for patients. And the aim of this policy is to ensure that no patient receives less favourable treatment on the grounds of who they are, what their gender is, their race, their colour, their nationality, ethnic, sexual orientation, national origin, identity or disability. Now the last section on here. So other ways to articulate this practice and to maintain safety and protection of vulnerable individuals can be, is basically just discuss your practice. You know, talk to each other, and you might do this via staff meetings, you might have appraisals, you might have supervision of colleagues, you might want to observe someone, you know, even coach others and mentor them, give them information about a new training course that you've been on or something you've just learned. It can happen in many ways. It's just about communicating. So when you're doing all of these things, you might be able to identify any gaps in knowledge that someone has. You might see that this particular person needs a little bit more information, or this other person is quite well versed. Maybe they can be a coach for one of our new employees or somebody who's not as confident or as sure. So like it helps you to get training opportunities being identified. You can go on formal courses, you can coach or mentor, and so on. So today, what we've looked at is how to support individuals to take risks and make informed choices, how to provide information to others on signs and symptoms of abuse, the measures to be taken to avoid abuse taking place, and then we've also looked at how to convey information that maintains the safety and protection of vulnerable individuals.